In 1975, inside Kodak's own research lab, a 24-year-old engineer built the first digital camera in history. His bosses looked at it and said, "It's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." 37 years later, that single decision would erase a 130-year-old empire from the face of the earth. This is the autopsy of the company that invented its own replacement and was too afraid to use it. In the mid-1970s, Eastman Kodak is not just a company, it is an economic superpower. It controls 90% of the photographic film market in the United States and 85% of all camera sales worldwide. With a global workforce of 145,000 employees, its operations shape entire cities, none more so than its home base of Rochester, New York. The business runs on a brutally effective razor and blade model. Kodak sells cheap cameras to get its hardware into every home, then reaps a staggering 70% profit margin on the film, paper, and chemicals needed to keep those cameras alive. This relentless cash machine secures Kodak's place as a cornerstone of global finance, guaranteeing its continuous run as a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average for 74 straight years. But Kodak's true power is cultural. Across 2 generations, the company defines how humanity remembers itself. When families experience birthdays, weddings, or vacations, they do not just take a photo, they capture a Kodak moment, sealing a trademarked phrase into the everyday vocabulary of the human experience. On January 19, 2012, the era of absolute dominance ends. Eastman Kodak files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the Southern District of New York. It is a sudden, violent descent. Shares that once traded at a peak of $94.75 plummet to just 36 cents, erasing billions in market value and reducing a global icon to a penny stock. But the true damage of this legal filing is measured in human lives. Inside the court dockets, Kodak moves to terminate its post-retirement medical plans. This single legal maneuver strips roughly 56,000 retirees of the healthcare coverage they were promised for life. For the generations of families who spent decades working the chemical lines, the security they traded their youth for vanishes with a judge's signature. In Rochester, this betrayal is marked by the sound of falling concrete. Over the coming years, the iconic manufacturing buildings at Eastman Business Park are systematically scheduled for demolition. Imploded one by one, the brick and steel complexes crumble into rubble, leaving giant empty voids in the city skyline where the world's photography was once born. A century of industrial pride is reduced to dust and broken promises. When an empire falls this quickly, the human mind looks for an executioner. It is easy to assume Kodak was blindsided by an aggressive rival or a predatory outsider who built a better trap. But the architect of Kodak's ultimate undoing did not work for a competitor in Tokyo or Silicon Valley. He was a quiet, 24-year-old electrical engineer working inside Kodak's own research laboratories in Rochester, New York. His name was Steven Sasson. Hired in 1974, Sasson was a loyal employee tasked with finding new ways to capture light. He worked to strengthen the company, completely unaware that his research would trigger a slow corporate suicide. This disruptive technology grew directly within Kodak's own walls, funded by the massive profits of the legacy film business. The threat was entirely internal, nurtured by the very hands that would eventually be choked by it. Born in 1854, founder George Eastman did not just build a manufacturing giant, he constructed a complete social architecture. Until his death in 1932, Eastman shaped Rochester into the ultimate company town, where generations of families lived entirely within the shadow of the enterprise. Kodak built the schools, funded the hospitals, and paid the wages that bought the homes. To grow up here meant your father worked the chemical emulsion lines, your mother packaged paper, and your family's future was secured by a lifetime promise of corporate benevolence. But the company's deepest anchor was emotional. In 1935, Kodak introduced Kodachrome, a revolutionary color film that defined the visual language of mid-century culture. Kodachrome did not just record events, it saturated reality, rendering family moments in vivid, warm, permanent tones. For decades, the act of preserving a child's first steps or a summer vacation required a physical transaction with Rochester. To hold onto a memory, families had to purchase a roll of yellow boxed film. Kodak owned the past because it owned the medium of remembrance, creating an unprecedented bond between a corporate logo and the human heart. It is December 1975 inside an applied research lab in Rochester, New York. 25-year-old engineer Steven Sasson stands over a workbench, preparing to capture an image without a single strip of film. Before him sits a bizarre, mechanical contraption. It is the size of a household toaster and weighs nearly 8 pounds. Built from spare parts, it runs on a Motorola voltmeter, a tiny lens pulled from a Super 8 movie camera, and a newly developed Fairchild charge-coupled device. Sasson points the cold metallic lens at a lab assistant, young technician Joy Marshall. He presses the button. No shutter clicks. No film advances. Instead, the camera begins to hum. The light reflecting off Marshall's face is converted into electrical signals, translated into binary code, and pushed into temporary RAM memory. Now comes the waiting. It takes 23 agonizing seconds for the blue tape inside a standard magnetic cassette to slowly wind forward, recording a mere 10,000 pixels of data, a microscopic 0.01 megapixels. To see the result, Sasson removes the cassette tape and slides it into a custom playback console wired directly to a nearby television screen. The tape spins. Suddenly, a blocky, low-resolution, black and white image of Joy Marshall flickers onto the vacuum tube television. The image is crude. It is blurry, but it is unmistakable. For the first time in human history, a photograph has been captured, stored, and displayed entirely through digital electronics, and it is born not in Silicon Valley, but by Kodak's own hand, under Kodak's own roof, using Kodak's own money. Sasson brings his creation to Kodak's executive suite, expecting triumph. Instead, he faces a room of cold calculation. Senior leadership looks at the screen, then at the young engineer. Their response is immediate, chilling, and immortalized in corporate history. It's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. At this moment, Kodak's legendary razor and blade business model becomes its straitjacket. The company enjoys gross margins of over 80% on physical film. Digital photography requires no paper, no processing chemicals, and no film. To the board, Sasson's digital camera is not an opportunity. It is an economic threat to their legacy revenue. So, they make a calculated play. In 1978, the company secures U.S. patent 4,131,919 for the electronic still camera, locking up the fundamental architecture of the invention. Then, they quietly bury it. Rather than commercializing the technology, Kodak treats the patent as a defensive shield, shelving the project to keep the digital future at bay. It is a gamble built on the belief that they can control the clock, deciding when the world is allowed to move past film. But Kodak's lock on the technology has an expiration date. In 1981, the outer wall of Kodak's monopoly begins to crack. Sony introduces the Mavica, an electronic camera that records still images onto a miniature video floppy disk. Physical film is entirely absent from the device. The threat is no longer a theoretical laboratory exercise. It is a commercial product heading for the global market. Inside Rochester, Kodak's own intelligence network is already sounding the alarm. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, planning departments commission detailed internal market assessments. The findings are stark and undeniable. These secret reports project a steady, relentless erosion of physical film revenues the moment digital imaging hits consumer-friendly price points. Kodak's analysts calculate a clear timeline, warning that the company has a window of roughly 10 to 15 years to prepare. But senior leadership chooses to treat this data as a hazard to be managed rather than an invitation to transform. Instead of launching a counteroffensive, executives file the studies away in corporate archives, choosing to protect their massive margins on yellow-boxed film. Ignorance is no longer a defense. The future is arriving exactly on schedule, and Kodak has the blueprints. In January 1988, Kodak attempts to diversify its way out of the looming digital storm. The board approves a staggering $5.1 billion acquisition of Sterling Drug, an unrelated pharmaceutical company hoping to secure new cash flows. The gamble fails, draining precious capital that should have funded digital research and development. 3 years later, in 1991, another financial disaster strikes. A 15-year patent battle with Polaroid over instant photography ends in a crushing $925 million settlement, forcing Kodak to abandon its instant camera lines overnight. Instead of consolidating what remains, Kodak spends the 1990s systematically spinning off its core chemical manufacturing assets, stripping itself of its historical industrial self-sufficiency, while the underlying film market continues to contract. Inside the executive suites, leadership defends these half-measures, treating digital as a passing, low-margin threat that can be outrun. When they later attempt to bridge the gap, they release compromised hybrid film-digital products that attempt to merge electronic capture with physical processing. These devices fail to find an audience, ignored by a market moving toward pure silicon. Each decision reveals a worsening cycle of self-harm, a board spending billions to protect legacy margins, treating genuine reinvention as a hazard to be avoided. When Kodak belatedly commits to consumer digital cameras, the financial reality is devastating. The company loses money on every single digital unit it sells, bleeding cash to manufacture hardware without the lucrative tail of film processing. Then, the timeline accelerates beyond their control. In June 2007, Apple launches the iPhone, permanently shifting photography from dedicated cameras to mobile screens. The physical photograph ceases to be a product. It becomes a stream of digital data. The scale of this transformation becomes brutally clear in April 2012. As Kodak languishes in bankruptcy court, a mobile application called Instagram is sold to Facebook for $1 billion. Instagram has just 13 employees. Kodak, which once employed 145,000 people to preserve the world's memories, is replaced by a digital startup that doesn't own a single chemical plant, paper mill, or warehouse. It is a complete humiliation for the pioneer of digital capture. In the research labs of Rochester, another revolution is quietly sold for parts. This is the second betrayal, a parallel mistake that proves the digital camera was not an isolated error, but a systemic corporate disease. In 1987, Kodak scientists Ching Wan Tang and Steven Van Slyke patent the first practical organic light-emitting diode, or OLED. It is the very technology that illuminates almost every modern smartphone and television screen on Earth today. Kodak holds the foundational design for the future of all visual displays, yet the corporate instinct remains completely unchanged. Facing mounting financial pressure and desperate to protect its de-eyeing film division, Kodak's board looks at this brilliant scientific breakthrough and sees nothing more than a short-term asset to be liquidated. In December 2009, they sell the entire OLED division, including their massive portfolio of over 2,000 display patents, to LG for just $100 million. Here is the part that genuinely stuns me the deeper you dig. Today, that exact OLED market is worth over $50 billion. Kodak missed the shift to digital photography, and they also sold off the screens the modern world would use to view it, trading a multi-billion-dollar empire to secure a few more months of survival. Subscribe for more investigations into the world's most fascinating corporate collapses. While the brick complexes of Rochester crumbled into dust across the Pacific, Fujifilm faced the exact same digital wave. In 2004, under chief executive Shigetaka Komori, Kodak's primary rival recognized that the market for physical photographic film was vanishing forever. But rather than trying to freeze the clock to protect legacy revenues, Fujifilm began a radical transformation. Komori looked closely at his company's core chemical expertise, realizing that the complex antioxidant formulas used to prevent color film from fading could also prevent human skin from aging. The company spent $9 billion on research, development, and corporate acquisitions between 2000 and 2010. They adapted their specialized chemistry to launch a highly successful cosmetics line, while aggressively expanding into pharmaceuticals and advanced display materials. By 2020, physical camera film accounted for less than 1% of Fujifilm's business. Today, the rebuilt Japanese giant generates $21 billion in consolidated revenue, completely eclipsing the hollowed-out remnants of Kodak. This stark divergence exposes the ultimate lesson of this corporate collapse. Kodak did not fall because of a foreign competitor, nor did it fall to the inevitable rise of the digital age. The company died from a boardroom decision to defend yesterday's high profit margins instead of investing in its own future. The real threat was never outside the walls of Rochester, it was inside the executive suite. Today, the toaster-sized prototype built by Steven Sasson sits behind glass in a museum. It remains there as cold, quiet evidence of the future Kodak once held in its hands, only to bury. Subscribe to follow our next corporate autopsy. Today, Rochester's silent factories stand as quiet monuments to a chilling truth. The greatest threat to any empire is not the competitor you do not see, but the innovation you choose to bury. Protecting yesterday's margins only guarantees tomorrow's irrelevance. If you are not willing to cannibalize your own success, someone else gladly will. Subscribe for more deep dive corporate autopsies.